Я, честно сказать, для вот своего имени, для наследия выбрал бы Моралеса. Почему? Потому что он сейчас непобежденный. Если завтра выиграешь Яна Гарри, будет говорить, его Шавкат побеждал там несколько боев назад. И, я согласен, что они оба.
Welcome to Cage Theory, where we break down the mindsets that separate champions from contenders. Ian Garry walked into UFC 330 with something that money can't buy, the unshakable belief that he was destined to destroy Islam Makhachev. Not arrogance, not bravado, something deeper. A conviction carved through short-notice wars, through taking fights nobody else would touch, through beating the best when the world said he wasn't ready. This is the story of how one Irish welterweight built a mentality so powerful that fear doesn't even exist in his psychological vocabulary. This is how champions are born.
Do you think that getting this fight against Islam Makhachev, do you think you've helped to make that happen, aside from just being a great fighter?
I believe so. I know I've earned this fight from fighting, but I absolutely know that my online presence has helped.
The narrative around Garry had always been incomplete. Yes, he'd earned this fight through pure dominance in the octagon, dismantling opponents with the precision of a surgeon and the hunger of a predator. But what people failed to understand was that Garry had weaponized his online presence itself, turning social media into another fighting arena where he shaped the story before either man stepped into the cage. His presence wasn't just noise. It was psychological warfare disguised as authenticity. He controlled the narrative because he understood what Islam Makhachev's disciples refused to acknowledge, that in modern combat sports, the mental battlefield is won before the physical one even begins.
I went in and I beat him by 3 rounds. Dominated me, couldn't take me down. The whole point of his game was he couldn't take me down. It's a guy who trained with Islam. So afterwards, I dropped this epic, leaving the octagon. There's a video of it, it's great. I dropped this epic, a guy actually handed me in the stand, he had like a massive leprechaun hat. So I took it off him in the stands, put it on my head, and then
But the system had stacked the deck against him in a way that revealed the absurdity of the UFC's matchmaking logic. Garry had just dismantled a legitimate threat, a fighter trained directly under Makhachev himself, in convincing fashion. 3 rounds, no takedowns, dominance, and his reward, to fight that same fighter again, except this time Islam would be waiting. The UFC had given him a training camp gift wrapped in their champion's playbook. Most fighters would crumble under that psychological weight. Garry saw it as confirmation of his destiny. The best contender had already beaten the champion's satellite. Now it was time to face the sun itself.
Yeah. I'm genuinely, like, I'm not afraid. There's nothing I see him doing that I'm afraid of. There's nothing I think of him doing that I'm afraid of. I chose to do this sport for a living. I chose to get into MMA. I wanted to be a world champion. I wanted to prove I was one of the best in the world. And I have to do that by beating some of the best in the world. So for me, there's no fear. There's risk of...
That leaving the octagon moment crystallized everything. A leprechaun hat borrowed from the stands, a promo drop that would echo through fighter forums and message boards for weeks. Garry standing there, scarred and victorious, speaking directly to Makhachev through the cosmic noise of the arena. It's your job, your duty. Show up, fight the best contender in the world, and you're looking at him. Some would call it delusion. Others would recognize it as the exact psychological posture required to face a 2-division champion who had never tasted defeat at welterweight. Garry was scripting reality, and he was about to write the script in the most violent way possible.
I was like, Islam, he couldn't stop me, he couldn't take me down, went through this whole I just dropped an epic promo for the fight. I was like, so it's your job, your duty, show up, fight the best contender in the world, and you're looking at him. Ian Machado Garry, it was wild, it was epic, so that you're ready for them. I know how good Islam Makhachev is. I know how talented he is. He's 29-1 in the sport. He's a 2-weight division champion.
The fear question always came up, and Garry's answer revealed a different beast entirely. He didn't fear Islam because fear implies surprise, implies the possibility of encountering something you haven't mentally rehearsed. Garry had already lost to Makhachev 1,000 times in his mind before the fight ever happened. In training, in visualization, in conversation with teammates, He knew what Islam's wrestling would feel like, how suffocating his top control could be, how a man could be held down for 25 minutes like a weighted blanket pressing you into the canvas. This wasn't positive thinking, it was combat realism. By accepting the worst-case scenario in advance, Garry had inoculated himself against the psychological virus of surprise. Islam Makhachev's resume was genuinely terrifying on paper. 29-1, two-division champion, the most successful lightweight title holder in UFC history, consecutive title defenses that had never been matched. Now he'd moved up, captured the welterweight crown, and was sitting on a record that could be extended if he defeated Garry. This was a man who had systematized excellence, who had climbed mountains that broke other climbers' legs. He was the #1 pound-for-pound fighter on the planet, not because he was flashy, but because he was inevitable. Every single statistical argument favored Islam. And Garry knew all of this, which made his conviction even more dangerous, because Garry understood something most fighters never grasp: the difference between fighting to not lose and fighting to win. He watched as champion after champion in MMA made the cardinal sin of fear-driven decisions, playing not to lose instead of playing to dominate. The sport was built on recency bias. You win and they love you, you lose and they forget you exist, then you win again and they pretend the loss never happened. But Garry refused to fight that fight. He wasn't stepping into the cage to survive 25 minutes of Islam's wrestling. He was stepping in to impose his will so completely that Makhachev's game plan would disintegrate. That's the mindset of a future champion, not fear management. Imposition. When asked directly if he feared the undefeated Makhachev, Garry's response cut through years of fighter interviews and manufactured respect. It's not going to happen. Why? Because I'm too good. I'm just too good. Not said with a smirk or a wink, said with the certainty of someone who had already made peace with every possible outcome and had arrived at the same conclusion, that Islam was not in his league. This wasn't delusion. This was the product of extensive analysis, game planning, and a refusal to mentally diminish his own capabilities. Garry had studied Makhachev's weaknesses the way a conspiracy theorist studies his target, and he was convinced, truly convinced, that the gaps he'd identified could be exploited on the biggest stage. The training camp philosophy Garry articulated would have made most old-school MMA coaches cringe. 1 session a day, 5 days a week, even during camp. Rest. Recovery, time with his wife and kids, playing in the garden. The 1%, according to Garry, wasn't an additional 5 hours of sparring or another strength session while your body was already broken. It was doing less. It was joy. It was the psychological and emotional freshness that came from remembering why you became a fighter in the first place. Most fighters misunderstand this principle, thinking that suffering equals progress. Garry had figured out that suffering without purpose is just suffering, and that the true edge comes from operating at maximum efficiency while maintaining the mental clarity to execute.